Hello, my name is Audrey Lankford, and I am currently a second-year graduate student at Marshall University studying speech therapy. In this presentation, I will be discussing the speech and language development of school-age children. So in this presentation, we're really going to be talking about what communication is and what communication is relative to speech and language. We are also going to be discussing the milestones from birth through 5th grade and kind of breaking that up a little bit so we can see the full development of the child until their school age. And then finally, I will be giving you some tips and tricks to help you get involved in your child's development. So to preface this entire presentation, it's really important to understand what we are looking for when assessing the development of the speech and language of your child, and that is communication. Communication is our main goal. So when we're thinking about that, we really want to answer, what is communication? So communication is the process of exchanging information and ideas. It's this overarching category that includes everything that we will discuss today. It includes speech and language, but these are not the first aspects of communication that to develop that we're going to look at. First, your child will need to engage in something known as prelinguistic communication. This communication is still the exchanging of information, like with gestures or body language, but it's not as complex as the later developing subcategories. So in this stage, your child is mainly just learning that you have the ability to interact with one another and that their participation and interaction can influence the outcome. They're laying the foundation for this next subcategory of communication, which is language. So again, examples of prelinguistic communication might be eye contact, gestures, pulling or throwing, even yelling and screaming, just understanding that what they're doing is influencing a reaction or the outcome. But then, I said that the next subcategory that's going to develop is going to be language. So language and speech are two different things. Language is the way in which we are going to select our words and how we're going to use them. So some examples are going to be learning new words, knowing how to put words together, and appropriately selecting words for the conversation. So an example I like to use is that for language, knowing when to use an S to make a word plural would be the language aspect of that kind of communication. Speech, on the other hand, is how we say words and the sounds that make up those words. So speech, in the same example, would be being able to say the S sound. So again, language would be knowing that to create the plural for the word book, to show that you have more than one book, would be using the word book. Speech would be being able to pronounce every single sound in that word. It could be book. And so those are kind of how those two are different. And again, language will start developing before speech. So how we're going to look at this at first is from birth to 5, we're going to split it up by birth to 1, 1 to 3, and 3 to 5. And we're going to start going through those milestones. So starting from birth to 1, we are mainly seeing aspects of that pre-linguistic communication emerge, and we're going to break it down into months because a lot is happening during this stage. However, we are also seeing the foundational aspects of speech and language begin to form. For example, your baby will begin experimenting with different sounds through cooing and babbling. They may giggle or laugh and cry when upset. And by 12 months, they should be able to begin to attempt 1 to 2 words, and that is all for speech. For language, they will begin to locate sounds by moving their eyes and start to recognize their names. They'll begin to understand basic common words like cup, truck, and juice, and even start responding to simple words or phrases like no. But keep in mind, this response may not yet be with words. It could be with gestures or vocalizations, but that is still language. Moving on from 1 to 3. So between 2 and 3, new words are going to begin to develop. And by the age of 3, 2 to 3 word phrases are going to be able to be utilized in speech. For language, your child will be able to start following one-step directions because they're going to be able to understand that sort of length in a direction, a phrase. And they'll be able to respond to simple questions. Then finally, by the age of 3, they'll be able to follow 2-part directions. It's kind of where we're wanting to go there. From 3 to 5, your child should be able to start answering simple WH questions. So who, where, why, what, how, and show some grammatical development in the form of pronouns and plurals, so he, she, they. By the age of 4, they should be able to understand, you should be able to understand almost everything that they're saying, because they will have developed almost all their sounds from 4 to 5. Now, obviously, some sounds are going to be harder than others. R is something specifically that a lot of children are going to have trouble developing. And really, up until the age of 8 is where we're going to be really concerned if nothing has developed. But by the age of 5, these sounds should have started developing. And hopefully, if your child's in the school system, your local speech pathologist will be screening to make sure that these are developing appropriately, and will reach out to you if they're not. And so children at this age of 5, should be able to understand more of the world around them and start identifying people and shapes, along with following more complex directions and relative concepts, such as first, next, and last. So around the age of 5 years old, it's important to note that the way we think about a child's language development shifts because of the introduction of reading and writing. So it gets much more complex at this point. So to make it simpler, instead of just thinking in terms of speech and language, we're now going to think of language using the terms expressive language and receptive language. Expressive language is the process of generating words, while receptive language is the comprehension of the words that are generated. So from this viewpoint, we can think of speech and writing as being expressive, and reading and listening as being receptive. And so these next few slides are going to have a lot more information, because again, now that we have 4 different domains that we're looking at, there's going to be so much more information on milestones. So feel free to pause the presentation whenever you would like, if you find an age group that is more applicable to your child and you would like more information on it, because I'll only be able to highlight a few of these bullet points, but they'll be important ones. We're going to begin to look at speech, and I've laid out a grid for you that shows kindergarten to 5th grade. So your child's speech will shift from your child speaking clearly and answering simple questions to being able to generate and deliver a speech. So it becomes much more complex. This will include understanding the audience and environment, so the delivery is not only clearly understood, but also appropriate for this situation. So these are things that are going to develop through kindergarten. They're going to be able to talk about more concepts at once, and again, be more complex in their language for that concept, and create longer streams of thought to be able to express with their speech. Then for listening, kindergartners are expected to be able to follow a simple conversation and understand short stories. As they develop, they'll remember more about what they hear and be able to understand more chunks of information in one session. For example, by 2nd grade, your child is expected to be able to follow 3 to 4 step directions. So they're really able to remember and comprehend more. And this is really important because we need them to do this, because by 5th grade, they should not only be able to understand information from multiple classes, but they should be able to use this information to create their own conclusions of the material. So this development for listening is also very important for the academic system. So reading is going to be one of our more complex domains, because your child is going to be transitioning from both learning how to read in kindergarten by the time of 4th or 5th grade, children are going to start in kindergarten learning how to read. So by the time they get to 4th or 5th grade, be reading to learn instead. So not only are we introducing a whole new system of language in the form of symbols and letters, and associating sounds with those symbols and combining those symbols, we are also expecting them to be able to use it to also gain information for comprehension by the time they reach 5th grade. So that's a lot to happen in these short few years. So that's why it's one of the most complex domains in this age group that we're going to be talking about. So in kindergarten, your child will be familiarized with the book and begin to learn the symbols associated with certain sounds. They'll develop ways to put those sounds together to understand the words that are written, and to develop words they recognize on sight, which are called sight words. This will continue to develop, and in 5th grade, they will begin to recognize root words in order to inference the meaning and read different types of text, such as fiction, nonfiction, and poetry. So really, the goal is to make reading as effortless as possible, right? So as a kid in kindergarten, they're going to start, and it might be kind of clunky. They're really going to be focusing on each individual letter and each sound, but by the time they get to 5th grade, it should become much more natural, especially when reading to themselves. So our final category of writing also hinges on the learning of symbols to represent sounds. In kindergarten, a child will learn how to write their first name. They will progress by being able to write about their ideas and continue to improve their spelling ability, whether it be through memorization of a spelling or using a dictionary to correct it. That's why you start seeing those spelling tests and things like that. Because again, we're wanting to partially memorize some of these words, but also develop abilities and strategies to be able to spell new words that we haven't ever seen before. So all of that is sort of a part of writing. So then finally, by 5th grade, they'll be able to write for a variety of reasons and even begin the editing process to revise their writing in order to create clear communication. And again, I wanted to highlight the sameness of the expressive language domains, right? Because it's a goal by 5th grade for both writing and speech. We see that it's just become much more complex and they're becoming much longer in their output. So for example, with writing a short essay, and then with speech, creating a short, simplistic speech. That's kind of where we're going. So as your child ages, everything will just become more complex and more intricate. So in order for your child to get to that point where they can create something to be more complex, you can help them. You can get involved with their development in a variety of ways, and I've listed a few. But the main thing to consider is that exposure to speech and language is key. So when they're young, or approximately before 2nd grade, a lot of this is just going to be talking with your child and reading to them. So that literacy exposure and just that sound exposure, it can also be allowing them to engage in conversation with you, and that's so that both expression and receptive language are targeted in this portion of their lives. And again, I gave a few examples that you can feel free to read, and there are even more available to you should you reach out. So then after 2nd grade, it's going to shift a little bit because your child is becoming more independent. So the exposure that they're going to seek is going to change. They should be able to read books themselves and start to connect information they hear or read to their own life. That's sort of inferencing. Reading and writing are going to start to be the main focuses here because, again, that is how our language changes when we get to this age. But don't be discouraged. Any kind of exposure to language is helpful. So continuing to read to them, continuing to try to expose them to new words and conversation is also helpful if your child is struggling in reading at this point. We just want them to be as exposed to language as they possibly can be. So all information in this PowerPoint was taken from the American Speech, Language, and Hearing Association. If you would like more information on any of the topics that we've covered today, you can visit www.asha.org. Thank you for your time.